Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 15 of Women's Wrestling Focus, brought to you by SEScoops and hosted by me, Ella J of A Wrestling Gal Podcast. And today we are here for a very special episode to give you a brief rundown and some noteworthy news about this year's PWI Women's 150 list that just dropped today. And this year is huge for women because not only is it celebrating women's wrestling, but this year itself is also a history-making moment with the Pro Wrestling Illustrated expanding their women's list from last year to 100 to now 150 women in the world, the top women in the world. So that itself is already history-making as women push boundaries and have arguably the best year in professional wrestling history, especially for women's wrestling. So, without further ado, let's break down some of this year's PWI Top 150 Women's List. Now, like I said, this year's list did expand from last year at 100 to now 150 women. So that already is 50 more talent being recognized. And it's crazy to think how far women have come in professional wrestling. As many years ago, there was no PWI women's list. And then we got 50, and then they made a breakthrough with 100, and now it's growing to 150 in the year of 2021. And I should specify that this year's list came during a specific evaluation period from October 1st, 2020 to September 30th, 2021. So the early moments of this month of October do not count towards this list. It is specifically through October of last year through September of this year. So that is the guidelines for this PWI women's list, and it's also taking into account wins and losses, quality of competition, cultural impact, and a whole lot more criteria. So number one on this year's top 150 women's list is none other than the EST of WWE, Bianca Belair. And rightfully so, I must say. Bianca Belair has definitely had a breakthrough year in WWE and perhaps the highlight and the most consistent player in the WWE women's division, especially looking across last year where we've had periods of times with the absences of specifically Becky Lynch, who was out for almost the entire evaluation period besides the last month and a half. Charlotte Flair was gone for a couple months. Asuka has been gone. Sasha Banks has been gone. Bayley has been gone the last few months of summer. So Bianca Belair has certainly stepped up to rightfully be number one, especially after winning the 2021 Women's Royal Rumble, after coming out at number 3, should I say. That itself is a feat to be so incredibly proud of, and she overcame basically 29 other women to win this Royal Rumble against Charlotte Flair and Rhea Ripley in the final 3. She also main evented WrestleMania against Sasha Banks in possibly match of the year. It's definitely a contender to be talked about, where she won the SmackDown Women's Championship from the boss, Sasha Banks, and went on a complete tear with a string of successful title defenses against the likes of Bayley and Carmella until ultimately Becky Lynch returned at SummerSlam, where she did defeat Bianca Belair. However, this past year for Bianca Belair cannot go unnoticed, and so she is number one. The EST of WWE is number one on your 2021 PWI Women's Top 150 Women's list. But it doesn't come alone. There is some other amazing names rounding out this top 5 and top 10. At number 2 is Utami of Stardom. She won the World of Stardom Championship last November and also competed in a grueling 43-minute match against Siri in Tokyo. And that itself is also arguably match of the year during this evaluation period. If you haven't watched it, I highly suggest it. She is definitely another credible and really deserving number 2 on this year's list. And number 3 is the Virtuosa Deonna Perazzo, your Impact Knockouts champion, 2-time Impact Knockouts champion during this evaluation period. She's been champ pretty much almost the entire evaluation period, except maybe 2 or 3 weeks late last year, where she lost it to Su Yung, but then quickly regained it. And so Deonna has definitely ruled the Impact Knockouts division, but she's also done some work outside of the Impact Zone, defeating Fabi Apache back in August to become the Reina de Reinas champion, as she likes to call herself now, the champ, and rightfully so. So she's definitely stepped through that forbidden door, also at NWA Empower, also defeating wrestling legend Melina at Empower in a high caliber, high intensity matchup. And of course, she's no stranger to defeating wrestling legends this past year with the likes of Jazz and ODB as well. And now she moves into competition with also wrestling legend Mickie James, but that does not count towards this evaluation period. But however, Deonna Perazzo at number 3 is very, very credible. She arguably, again, this is all subjective. Let me know so far. I mean, we're only going through numbers 1 through 3 so far, but Deonna Perazzo could also make the argument for number 1 or 2, but as it stands officially, she is number 3 on this year's list, and followed by one of her great real life friends, Britt Baker, and she stands as your current AEW Women's Champion after defeating Hikaru Shida back in May, and she also competed in the first ever women's main event for AEW against number 5, Thunder Rosa. But Britt Baker has also had an incredible year itself, possibly always at the forefront of the AEW women's division. She has been there constantly, even through injury. Britt Baker has always been trusted by AEW to carry this division, and so her work has definitely been recognized not only by AEW, but by Pro Wrestling Illustrated as well. And for that, she stands at number 4 on this year's list. But like I said, she did compete in the AEW Lights Out match, which also was another incredible matchup, which again could make the argument for Match of the Year too as well. But she was defeated by number 5, Thunder Rosa, who is also no stranger to the Forbidden Door. She did recently beat Kylie Rae for the Warrior Wrestling Women's Champion, and she is definitely a strong advocate for women's wrestling, as she leads her own amazing promotion in the form of Mission Pro. And she did also show up at Slammiversary as Deonna Perazzo's mystery opponent for the Knockouts Championship, where she was defeated by Perazzo. But Thunder Rosa has been everywhere, between her work in NWA to now transitioning and signing with AEW. She has definitely been a high note of this past year in women's wrestling specifically, and so her work, I believe rightfully so, earns her spot at number 5. Thunder Rosa has gone through this forbidden door and has now landed herself in All Elite Wrestling officially, and the crowd is definitely behind her. I mean, did you see that reaction in the Casino Royale when Ruby Soho and her had that stare down? I think that itself speaks major volumes. And moving on to number 6 is the boss, Sasha Banks. Like I said, Sasha Banks was out for a couple of months after WrestleMania, but she has still had an incredible year with a near 6-month reign as the SmackDown Women's Champion heading into WrestleMania, where she won it by defeating last year's number 1 Bayley last October. So Sasha Banks definitely ruled SmackDown for the first half of this evaluation period, and is again one half of this year's WrestleMania main event with Bianca Belair. So she's definitely done some incredible things. She has been ruling SmackDown and always has a great draw to herself. So Sasha Banks at number 6 feels right. She's been the boss for many years now, and so she rolls in at number 6. And rounding out the top 10, Utami of Stardom is also number 7, where she held the Stardom SWA title and the Goddess of Stardom Championship. And clocking in at number 8 is Yoshirai, who held the NXT Women's Championship for about half the evaluation period, much like Sasha Banks. Yoshirai did lose it though at NXT TakeOver Stand and Deliver to Raquel Gonzalez, but she does also now hold the NXT Women's Tag Team titles with Zoe Stark. So Io Shirai is definitely no stranger to gold during this evaluation period. Basically, there was only a 2-month window where she didn't hold any gold, so Io Shirai being back again feels right, and she is always incredible. And rounding out the top 10 at number 9 is Tam Nakano, who held the Wonder of Stardom Championship during the evaluation period, and number 10 is Raquel Gonzalez, who beat Yoshirai for the NXT Women's Championship, and she also had a strong showing in last year's War Games, and also beat Rhea Ripley in a brutal last woman standing match last year. So that rounds out your top 10, but there's some other familiar faces and familiar names in the top 20. So some other WWE representatives in the top 20 include Rhea Ripley at number 12, again, a former Raw Women's Champion, and now your current WWE Women's Tag Team Champions. You have Asuka at number 14, again, a former Raw Women's Champion during the period. She held it, basically the first 6 months of the period before Rhea Ripley defeated her. You have Charlotte Flair at number 15, again a former WWE Women's Tag Team Champion and now two-time Raw Women's Champion during the evaluation period. She won it twice. And Kaylee Ray at number 17, the former NXT UK Women's Champion, again has the second longest reign ever in terms of Women's Champion in WWE history, and of course the most in the modern era. But you also have Serena Deeb, who you can't forget about, clocking in at number 11, again a former NWA Women's Champion who has had multiple appearances on NWA and AEW, who is arguably the best women's wrestler ever, or as the best wrestler, I should say. And we have another AEW representative in the top 20 as well, as Hikaru Shida ranks in at number 13, again a former AEW Women's World Champion before she lost it to Britt Baker back in May. And we also have Nyla Rose and Jade Cargill rounding out the top 50 in terms of AEW representation. And so there's a lot going on this list. I mean, you have a lot of different companies in this world. You have the NWA Women's World Champion Camille ranking it at number 32. She's definitely had a dominant force since claiming the NWA Women's World Championship, and she's also had a successful defense at NWA Empower against Layla Hirsch, and she's also defeated Kenzie Page. And so Camille, I feel like, is definitely one of those rising stars who's just going to continue to traject upwards. I feel like she's really truly just getting started, and so it wouldn't be a shock to have her rank even higher next year. I feel like Camille is just getting started in her reign, and she has absolutely been dominant so far since becoming the NWA Women's World Champion. But we also have to talk about the fact that you have two women in the top 20 who I think are really cool, underrated history makers. So Trisha Dora clocks in this year at number 18, where she was also the highest ranked woman ever on the PWI 500 that came out last month, as she ranked at number 44 in that. So that alone, she was number 44, which is the highest a woman has ever ranked on the PWI 500. And so that itself is amazing. But Trisha Dora now ranks number 18 on the top 150 women's list, as she is obviously also your Pan-African Diaspora Wrestling World Champion, and she also had an incredible 30-minute Iron Woman match against Tootie Lynn for BACW. So Trisha Dora has been everywhere with WWR Plus and beyond. With Ring of Honor, obviously, she was in the tournament to crown the first ever champion and made it to the semifinals. The Afropunk is definitely, again, much like Camille, I feel like on that upward trajectory where she can possibly, actually I have no doubt, she's going to rank even higher next year if she continues this momentum going forward. So Trisha Dora at number 18 as the top 18 women's wrestler in the world, she can only go up from here. And right behind her is Giselle Shaw, who has been absolutely killing it. And I feel like that's really important because through this whole pandemic, like, the UK was shut down for a long time. So the fact that Giselle Shaw is the highest ranked woman on the British UK wrestling scene at number 19 really speaks volumes, as again, she is the current Rev Pro Undisputed British Champion, and she did also win the Progress Women's Championship. So she is the holder of 2 titles right now. So Giselle Shaw has definitely made the most of her time on the professional wrestling scene, especially in a world where the pandemic hindered a lot of other countries due to travel restrictions and lockdowns and all of that, which speaking of countries with a lot of lockdowns, we do have some Australian representation also in this top 150 women's list in the form of Jessica in the form of the likes of Jessica Troy at number 84, where she held the PWI Championship for 730 days before losing it during this evaluation period. That itself is incredible. She held it for such a long time, and so I'm truly ready to see the Arm Collector get back into wrestling action as Australia is now opening its gates, which brings Charlie Evans at number 87, who recently made her return to the USA at GCW a couple weeks ago, and she was also recently announced for the Shimmer return show. So Charlie Evans, again, now back in the US, the potential is really limitless. She does also currently hold the Pro Wrestling Eve Tag Team Championship with Millie McKenzie still, who is in NXT UK. So I don't really know how that dynamic is going to work because they're in two different countries now, but I'm excited. Charlie Evans being back in the USA is super fun. She's been in the UK, Australia, and the USA all within a year and a half. That itself is insane and is really a testament to her work ethic. And so I think now that Australia has really opened its gates up, I think we're going to be seeing some more Australian talent more over the world. And again, I think we're going to be seeing some more next year, as I know Shazza McKenzie definitely has her USA tour planned. And so I think next year we're definitely going to be getting a lot more Australian representation on this women's list. But for now, Jessica Troy clocks in at number 84 and Charlie Evans comes in at number 87. And of course, we have to talk about last year's number one. Last year's number one, Bayley, absolutely ruled late 2019 going into 2020 as the SmackDown Women's Champion the whole evaluation period. She's definitely had an incredible run. She did drop a bit this year, though, at number 21 after losing the SmackDown Women's Championship to Sasha Banks a couple weeks into the evaluation period, but she did have strong showings against Bianca Belair and Sasha Banks before she tore her ACL mid-summer just before Money in the Bank. But Bayley's work has always been incredible, and even though she didn't even have a match at WrestleMania, she still was a significant part of the show. So again, I think that is really, really a testament to her work ethic and people's trust and really value to her. So Bayley, as soon as she recovers from her injury, I think is again going to be on an upward trajectory to reclaim her spot in the top 20. And of course, switching gears, I think people might be pleasantly surprised, but I mean, I think it's truly well deserved. But the inaugural Ring of Honor Women's World Champion, Roxy, made the list at number 28. Again, she has absolutely taken the world by storm and has held multiple championships throughout this period as the new Texas Pro Women's Champion. She was also the Reality of Wrestling Diamonds Division Champion for a while during this evaluation period. And so Roxy, as the now inaugural Ring of Honor Women's World Champion, went through a whole 15-woman tournament through multiple rounds, defeating Miranda Alizé in the finals, and is now the youngest champion in the history of Ring of Honor. Now, the first ever to hold that elite championship. So again, she is really just on an upward trajectory. Again, she could possibly be even top 10 next year with the way she's going. Definitely number 28. I think some people might be pleasantly surprised, but I honestly think it's well deserved. She has been such a name on the Texas scene and the US scene for a while now, and to have that recognized in the form of the Ring of Honor Women's World Championship, Roxy, the prodigy, is definitely not one to go unnoticed. Her work definitely doesn't go unnoticed, and so I think she is rightfully placed and really has the potential to go up even higher on this list. And again, this girl isn't even 20 years old yet at the time of recording this. So again, she has her whole career ahead of her. I think she's going to be taking that Ring of Honor Women's division by storm, and what a great person to be the face of the new and reinvented Ring of Honor Women's division then in the form of the prodigy Roxy. So the future is in her hands, it seems, and rightfully so. I am so incredibly proud of Roxy and have nothing but high hopes for her. And again, rounding out this list is a woman on the New England scene and the leader of the Scrunchy Squad, Becca, who recently also made her AEW Dark debut, and she is the current Chaotic Wrestling Pan-Optic Champion and the current NCW Women's Champion. Becca is one of those people where if you don't know her name, you should know it now. She has such a cool, entertaining, and lively value to her. She's been teaming with Erica Lee and Davian and the Sea Stars and a lot of people on the New England scene, but she's been traveling a bit more. She's done some work with Beyond and of course Chaotic and Limitless. She is definitely, again, she's making her debut as number 150 on this top 150 women's list, but again, I think this is really just the start for Becca, considering she just made her pro debut last year. That's not bad to make your debut on this PWI women's list literally in your second year, not even your full second year of wrestling. So that itself is so history making for Becca. And again, like a lot of the people on this list, Becca is definitely one to watch next year in 2022. And again, I think she can climb even to the top 50% next year, but we'll see what happens. Nothing is for certain in the world of professional wrestling, but again, those are just some takeaways from this year's top 150 women's list. We would honestly be here all day if we went through all of them. So if you want to check out the full version where I actually had the pleasure of being a part of this year's ranking committee and even wrote a little article on NWA Empower. You can check out the full issue now digitally and on newsstands in a few weeks, but the list is now officially out and I am so happy to have been able to contribute to this year's PWI list and a whole article on NWA Empower. Thank you to Mickey James, Deanna Perazzo, and Chelsea Green who contributed quotes to it. It was absolutely fantastic speaking with them, and again, this was just really a great year for women's wrestling. I feel like especially these last few months, and really, I mean, WrestleMania was also a history making moment with Sasha Banks and Bianca Belair. So arguably match of the year, Bianca Belair at number one just feels right. It had such a cultural impact and really sent a bigger message that went beyond wrestling. And of course, Bianca Belair and Sasha Banks had an incredible matchup, and both of their in-ring work is absolutely superb, but just women's wrestling sometimes goes beyond the ring. And of course, Bianca Belair at number one just feels right as the all-around number one woman this past evaluation period in the 2021 Pro Wrestling Illustrated Top 150 Women's List. So that does it. If you want to check out the full issue, you can check it out, where you can see all of the rankings and all of the notes and my article at Pro Wrestling Illustrated. You can check it out. It's a great issue. Again, it not only includes the rankings, but also a lot of cool articles, and so that about does it. Let me know down below, who would have been your top 5 in this year's PWI Women's Top 150s list. Again, wrestling is so subjective that sometimes it's hard to narrow it down, and I feel like everybody has differing opinions where some person should be ranked higher, some person should be ranked lower. Maybe there's some people who didn't make the list that you think should make the list. Let me know down below, who do you think should have made the list perhaps that didn't? And also, who would have been your top 5 or top 10 even? Let me know down below. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to SEScoops for more future videos, including some fun interviews coming up, and of course, more episodes of Women's Wrestling Focus with myself, Ella J of a Wrestling Gal podcast. And so that concludes this episode 15 of Women's Wrestling Focus. Again, let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and don't forget to check out this year's PWI Top 150 Women's List issue, where you can see all of the rankings in there and all of the amazing women in celebrating women's wrestling. We've made so many strides in the women's wrestling world, and I highly look forward to 2022 to break even more glass ceilings. But for this year, Bianca Belair walks away as the number one woman. Thanks, guys.